The smell of burning flesh filled Sebastian Whitmore's nostrils as he stumbled through the farmhouse door, half carrying, half dragging the enormous orc warrior whose weight threatened to buckle his knees with every lurching step. Blood soaked through the makeshift bandages he had wrapped around her abdomen hours earlier when he found her collapsed in his wheat field, and her green skin had taken on an alarming grayish pallor that made his heart hammer against his ribs. He had seen enough wounded soldiers during his 5 years serving in the border wars to recognize the signs of infection setting in, and the fever radiating from her body told him she did not have much time left unless he could break it. Sebastian kicked the door shut behind them and guided the semi-conscious orc toward his bed, the only piece of furniture in the small farmhouse that could possibly accommodate her massive frame. She stood nearly 7 feet tall, with broad shoulders corded with muscle and arms thick as tree branches. Her black hair, braided in intricate patterns he did not recognize, had come loose during her ordeal and now hung in tangled ropes around her scarred face. 2 small tusks protruded from her lower jaw, and her pointed ears twitched even in her fevered state, responding to sounds he could not detect. "Easy now," he murmured, lowering her onto the straw mattress with as much gentleness as he could manage. The bed frame groaned under her weight but held. "You are safe here. I am going to help you." The orc's yellow eyes flickered open, unfocused and glazed with pain. Her lips moved, forming words in a guttural language he did not understand. Then her eyes rolled back and she went still except for the rapid rise and fall of her chest. Sebastian ran to the well behind his house and drew up bucket after bucket of cold water, his arms burning with the effort. He had been working his field since dawn, 14 hours of back-breaking labor under the summer sun, and his body protested this additional strain. But he pushed through the exhaustion. The woman lying in his bed was dying, and whatever ancient enmity supposedly existed between their peoples meant nothing in the face of that simple truth. He stripped away the crude leather armor she wore, revealing the jagged wound that stretched from her lower ribs to her hip. Something with claws had torn through her flesh, raking deep furrows that still wept blood despite his earlier attempts at bandaging. The edges of the wound had turned an angry red, and when he pressed gently around it, the orc groaned and tried to pull away even in her unconscious state. Sebastian had learned basic field medicine during the war, enough to keep himself and his fellow soldiers alive until they could reach a proper healer. He knew he needed to clean the wound thoroughly, burn out the infection if necessary, and keep her fever from rising any higher. The last part would be the hardest. Fever killed more soldiers than swords ever did. He soaked several clean cloths in the cold well water and laid them across her forehead, cheeks, and neck. Her skin felt like heated metal beneath his fingers. He worked quickly, changing the cloths every few minutes as they absorbed the terrible heat radiating from her body. Between cooling treatments, he cleaned her wound with boiled water and the last of his honey, which his mother had taught him could prevent infection from worsening. The night stretched before him, long and uncertain. Sebastian pulled a chair beside the bed and settled in, keeping one hand on a fresh cloth and the other resting lightly on the orc's wrist to monitor her pulse. It raced beneath his fingers, far too fast. He found himself talking to her, not knowing if she could hear him, but needing to fill the silence with something other than her labored breathing. "My name is Sebastian Whitmore," he said quietly. "This is my farm, about 20 miles south of Greystone Village. I bought it 3 years ago when I mustered out of the king's army. Figured I had seen enough fighting to last a lifetime." He wrung out another cloth and placed it on her burning forehead. "Found you in my north field this afternoon, lying face down in the wheat, Thought you were dead at first. Then I saw you were still breathing." The orc did not respond. Her chest continued its rapid rise and fall. "I do not know who you are or how you got hurt," Sebastian continued, "but no one deserves to die alone in a field." He paused, studying her face. Up close, stripped of the propaganda and fear-mongering he had been fed his entire life, she looked remarkably human. Pain etched lines around her eyes and mouth. An old scar bisected her left eyebrow. Her hands, calloused and strong, bore the marks of hard use. "You are a warrior, that much is clear. But what were you fighting?" Hours passed. Sebastian changed the cooling cloths again and again, his movements becoming mechanical as exhaustion settled into his bones. He had been awake for nearly 20 hours, but sleep remained impossible. Every time the orc's breathing changed or she shifted on the bed, his heart leaped into his throat. Around midnight, her fever spiked higher. She began thrashing, nearly throwing herself off the bed despite her weakened state. Sebastian had to use all his strength to hold her down, pressing his weight against her shoulders while trying not to aggravate her wound. "Stop, you will hurt yourself," he said urgently. "Please, you need to stay still." The orc's eyes snapped open, wild and unseeing. She grabbed his arm with one massive hand, her grip like iron despite her condition. Words poured from her mouth in that harsh, unfamiliar tongue, rising and falling in what sounded like desperate pleading. "I do not understand," Sebastian said, his own voice tight with fear. "I am trying to help you. Please, you have to trust me." For a moment, their eyes met. Even through the fever haze, Sebastian saw intelligence there and something else. Fear. She was afraid, this powerful warrior who could probably snap him like a twig if she were healthy. The recognition of that shared vulnerability made something shift in his chest. He covered her hand with his own, gentling his voice. "It is all right. You are safe here. I swear to you, I mean no harm." Perhaps she heard something in his tone that transcended language. Perhaps she simply had no strength left to fight. Either way, she released his arm and slumped back against the mattress, her eyes closing again. But her hand found his and held it, her fingers wrapping around his palm with surprising gentleness. Sebastian held her hand and continued his vigil, cooling her brow with fresh cloths every few minutes. He dozed occasionally, his head dropping forward only to jerk back up when she stirred or made a sound. The candles burned low, filling the room with flickering shadows that danced across the rough wooden walls. Dawn crept through the single window of the farmhouse, pale gray light that grew steadily brighter. Sebastian blinked gritty eyes and checked the orc's pulse again. Still too fast, but perhaps not quite as frantic as before. Her skin remained hot, but the grayish cast had faded slightly. Hope, fragile and tentative, sparked in his chest. He prepared a thin broth from dried meat and vegetables, the same concoction that had sustained him through his own recovery from a sword wound 2 years ago. If she woke, she would need something gentle on her stomach. He set the pot over the fire and returned to his chair, resuming his endless cycle of cooling her fever. "Second day now," he told her sleeping form. "You are still fighting. That is good. Keep fighting." Throughout the morning, her fever ebbed and flowed like a tide. Sometimes it seemed to break, her skin cooling enough that Sebastian dared to hope. Then it would surge back, forcing him to work faster with the cloths and cold water. He sponged down her arms, chest, and legs, trying to draw the heat from her body. Modesty seemed irrelevant when balanced against her life, and he worked with the clinical efficiency he had learned on the battlefield. Around midday, as Sebastian was dozing in his chair with his hand still resting on her wrist, the orc stirred. Her fingers twitched, then her eyes opened, clearer than they had been since he found her. She turned her head slowly, taking in her surroundings with obvious confusion. When her gaze landed on Sebastian, she went very still. He raised his free hand in what he hoped was a calming gesture. "Easy. You are badly hurt, but you are safe. I found you in my field yesterday. You have been burning with fever." He gestured to the bowl of broth. "Are you thirsty? Hungry?" The orc stared at him for a long moment. Then, in heavily accented but understandable common tongue, she rasped, "You help me." "Yes." Sebastian reached for a cup of water and supported her head so she could drink. She gulped it down greedily, water running down her chin. When she finished, he lowered her back to the pillow. "You were dying, are still very sick if I am being honest, but your fever has broken a little." "Why?" The single word carried a weight of confusion and suspicion. "Because it was the right thing to do," Sebastian said simply. "Do you remember what happened to you?" The orc closed her eyes, and for a moment he thought she had lost consciousness again. Then she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Beowulf, protecting its den, I did not see it until too late." She opened her eyes again, fixing him with that intense yellow gaze. "I am Fira Crag. I owe you a life debt, human." "You owe me nothing," Sebastian said firmly. "I am Sebastian Whitmore. This is my farm. Rest now. We can talk more when you are stronger." But Fira shook her head, agitation making her try to sit up. Sebastian pressed her shoulders gently but firmly back down. "A life debt is sacred among my people," she insisted. "You saved my life. That debt must be repaid." "Then repay it by staying alive," Sebastian told her. "Right now that means resting and letting your body heal. Please, Fira, you are still very weak." She searched his face for a long moment, as if looking for deception. Whatever she saw must have satisfied her because she nodded slightly and closed her eyes. "You are strange, Sebastian Whitmore, so I have been told." He convinced her to drink some broth, supporting her head while she sipped carefully. Most of it stayed down, which he counted as a victory. Then he changed the dressing on her wound, noting with relief that the angry redness had faded slightly and the bleeding had stopped. The fever had not broken completely, but it had retreated enough to give them both some breathing room. Fira drifted in and out of sleep throughout the afternoon. Each time she woke, Sebastian was there with water or broth, with cooling cloths when the fever spiked again, with quiet words of encouragement. He told her about his farm, about the wheat crop that would need harvesting in another month, about the small vegetable garden he tended behind the house. Mundane things that seemed to calm her. In return, during her more lucid moments, Fira told him fragments of her story. She was a scout for her clan, ranging far from their mountain home to track game and watch for threats. The Beowulf had caught her by surprise in a narrow ravine. She had killed it, but not before it inflicted terrible damage. She had been trying to reach her clan's territory when blood loss and infection overwhelmed her. "They will come looking for me," she said during one of these conversations, "when I do not return." "How long before they start searching?" Sebastian asked. "I left 4 days ago, was supposed to return yesterday." Fira's expression tightened. "They will assume humans killed me." Sebastian absorbed this information with growing unease. He had fought orcs during the war, though he had never been comfortable with it. They were formidable warriors, fierce and uncompromising. The idea of an orc war party descending on his isolated farm searching for their missing scout made his mouth go dry. "Will you tell them what happened?" He asked carefully. "That I helped you?" "Yes," Fira met his eyes, "but I do not know if they will care. My brother is clan chief. He does not trust humans with reason." "What happened?" Fira's jaw tightened. 3 winters ago, human soldiers raided our village while the warriors were away hunting. Killed the elders, the children who could not fight. My mother died defending the nursery." Her voice remained flat, emotionless, but Sebastian could see the pain in her eyes. Korash, my brother, has not forgotten. He will not forget. Guilt twisted in Sebastian's stomach. He knew about those raids, though he had never participated in one. Commanders justified them as preemptive strikes against savage raiders, but what Fira described was simply slaughter. I am sorry. Why? You did not do it. No, but I wore the same uniform as those who did. Sebastian wrung out another cloth and laid it gently across her forehead. I am sorry for what my people did to yours, and I am sorry your brother will likely want to kill me for helping you. Something that might have been amusement flickered across Fira's face. He will definitely want to kill you, especially if he finds you caring for me like this. He will think you took advantage. I would never, I know. Fira caught his hand, squeezing it briefly. I have seen how you look away when you tend my wound, how careful you are to preserve my dignity. You are honorable, Sebastian Whitmore. That makes you rare among your kind. Not all humans are monsters. Not all orcs are either. Fira's eyes drifted closed again. But we keep killing each other anyway. That night, Sebastian maintained his watch beside Fira's bed. Her fever continued its battle, rising and falling in waves that left him exhausted from constant vigilance. He dozed in his chair, jerking awake every time she stirred or made a sound. His back ached from the awkward position, and his arms felt like lead from drawing endless buckets of water, but he never left her side. Around midnight, Fira's fever spiked again, worse than before. She thrashed and cried out in her own language, sweat pouring from her skin. Sebastian worked frantically, covering her with cold cloths and trying to keep her still enough that she would not tear her wound open. Fira, listen to me, he said urgently, gripping her shoulders. You have to fight this. Do not give up now, please. Her eyes opened, unfocused and wild. She grabbed his wrist with bruising force, pulling him close. More words in Orcish poured from her mouth, desperate and pleading. Then, in common, Mother, I am sorry. I tried to protect them. You are not with your mother, Sebastian said, keeping his voice calm despite his racing heart. You are with me, Sebastian. You are safe on my farm. The fever is making you confused. So many dead, so much blood. Tears leaked from the corners of her eyes. Could not save them. Sebastian's throat tightened. He had seen this before during the war. Fever did not just burn the body, it stripped away the walls people built around their worst memories. He gathered her against his chest, holding her as carefully as he would hold something precious and fragile, and let her cry. It was not your fault, he murmured. You could not have known. You could not have saved them all. Fira clung to him with desperate strength, her face pressed against his shoulder. Her tears soaked through his shirt. He held her and rocked her gently, one hand stroking her tangled hair, until the worst of the fever dream passed and she went limp in his arms. He lowered her back to the bed and resumed his work with the cooling cloths. Her breathing gradually steadied, the wild edge of panic fading from her features. Sebastian kept up a steady stream of quiet words, not sure if she could hear him but needing to try anyway. You are strong, Fira. Stronger than anyone I have ever met. This fever will not defeat you. I will not let it. He refreshed the cloth on her forehead. When you are well, you can go back to your people. Tell them about the human who helped you. Maybe it will make a difference. Maybe it is a start. Dawn found Sebastian slumped over the side of the bed, one hand still resting on Fira's arm, fast asleep from sheer exhaustion. The first rays of sunlight woke him, and he jerked upright with a start. His first panicked thought was that she had died during his moment of weakness. But Fira's chest rose and fell in a steady rhythm, and when he pressed his hand to her forehead, her skin felt merely warm instead of burning. The fever had broken. Relief made him dizzy. He slumped back in his chair and covered his face with his hands, taking deep, shuddering breaths. She would live. After 2 days and nights of desperate battle, the fever had finally released its grip. When he looked up, Fira's eyes were open and clear, watching him with an expression he could not quite read. "You look terrible," she said, her voice hoarse but lucid. Sebastian laughed, the sound surprising them both. "Well, you look better than you did yesterday, so I will take that as a compliment." He reached for the water cup. "How do you feel?" "Like a bear-wolf tried to gut me." Fira accepted his help drinking, then studied him seriously. "You stayed with me the whole time." "Of course I did." "Why?" Sebastian considered the question. "I told you it was the right thing to do, also." He hesitated, then continued, "During the war I got wounded badly. Took an arrow to the shoulder that festered. I was burning with fever for 3 days, and a farmer named Marcus took me into his home and cared for me. He was old, probably 70, and he had lost his son to the fighting 2 years before. Could have let me die, should have let me die after what my army did to his village. But he did not." Sebastian met Fira's eyes. "He told me that every life saved was a small act of rebellion against the violence that had taken so much from all of us. I never forgot that." "Where is he now, this Marcus?" "Dead. Died the winter after he saved me. I was at his funeral." Sebastian smiled sadly. "He left me his lucky coin, said I would need it more than he would." He pulled a worn copper coin from his pocket and showed it to Fira. "I carry it everywhere." Fira reached out and touched the coin lightly with one finger. "He sounds like a good man." "He was the best man I ever met." Sebastian tucked the coin away. "Now, enough talk. You need to eat something more substantial than broth." Over the following days, Fira's recovery progressed steadily. The fever did not return, and her wound began to heal, the edges knitting together cleanly. She remained bedridden, too weak to stand for more than a few minutes at a time, but her strength returned gradually. Sebastian fell into a routine of sorts. He would wake at dawn, tend to the most urgent farm tasks, then return to care for Fira. He changed her bandages, brought her meals, and helped her move when lying in one position became too uncomfortable. They talked for hours, sharing stories about their vastly different lives. Fira told him about growing up in the mountains, learning to hunt and track before she learned to read. She described the harsh beauty of her homeland, the ceremonies and traditions that bound her people together. She spoke of her brother with complicated affection, portraying him as both a stern leader and a protective family member who had taught her everything she knew about being a warrior. In return, Sebastian told her about his childhood on a small farm not unlike this one, about joining the army to escape debt after his parents died, about the battles he wished he could forget. He described his dreams for this farm, his hope that he could build something peaceful here far from the conflicts that had defined his youth. "You fight in the border wars?" Fira asked one afternoon as Sebastian helped her sit up to eat. 5 years, he confirmed. "Saw action in a dozen major battles, countless smaller skirmishes. Killed more people than I can count, orc and human both." He set a bowl of stew in her hands. "I hated every moment of it." "Then why did you keep fighting?" "Because I had no choice. Desert and they hang you. Refuse an order and they shoot you." Sebastian sat in his now familiar chair beside the bed. "I kept my head down, followed orders, and tried not to think too much about what I was doing. It was the only way to survive." Fira ate in thoughtful silence for a moment. "You killed orcs?" "Yes." He met her eyes steadily. "I will not lie to you about that." "Do you regret it?" Sebastian considered the question carefully. "I regret the war. I regret that we were put in positions where we had to kill each other. But in the moment on the battlefield, I did what I had to do to keep myself and my friends alive. I think your warriors did the same thing." He paused. "Does it bother you, knowing I killed your people?" "Yes." Fira did not look away. "But you also saved my life when you could have let me die." Actions matter more than the past. She took another bite of stew. This is good. You cook well for a soldier. Farmer now, Sebastian corrected with a slight smile. And thank you. As the days passed, Sebastian found himself looking forward to the hours they spent talking. Fira had a sharp wit and sharper intellect. She asked probing questions about human culture and customs, about the political structures that governed his people. In turn, she explained the clan system that organized Orc society, the complex web of debts and obligations that bound families together. So if I saved your life, you owe me a life debt, Sebastian said one evening as he helped her walk a few circuits around the room to rebuild her strength. What exactly does that mean? It means I am bound to you until the debt is repaid. Fira leaned heavily on his arm, her step still uncertain. If you were attacked, I would defend you. If you needed help, I would provide it. The debt passes to my children if I die before repaying it. That seems excessive for basic decency. Your people do not have this. We say thank you and maybe give a gift, but nothing so formal. Sebastian guided her back to the bed and helped her settle. I told you before, I do not want anything from you. You owe me nothing. Fira shook her head firmly. The debt exists whether you accept it or not. It is sacred to my people, Sebastian. Do not dishonor me by refusing it. He saw the sincerity in her eyes and nodded slowly. All right, I accept that you feel you owe me, but I will never demand payment. Of course not, Fira said, a hint of amusement in her voice. You are too honorable for that. It makes you very frustrating. I frustrate you, constantly. But she was smiling as she said it. On the 8th day after Sebastian found her, Fira managed to walk outside unaided. She moved slowly, one hand pressed to her healing wound, but she walked on her own strength. Sebastian hovered nearby in case she stumbled, but she waved him off irritably. I am not made of glass, she said. I need to rebuild my strength. You were dying a week ago, Sebastian pointed out. Forgive me for being cautious. Fira stopped at the edge of his wheat field, staring out at the golden stalks that rippled in the afternoon breeze. This is beautiful. You grew all this yourself. Planted it last spring, yes. We'll harvest it next month. Sebastian stood beside her, pride warming his chest. First crop on this land in 5 years. Previous owner abandoned it when the war came through. You are a good farmer. I try. He glanced at her. Do your people farm? Some. We are better herders. Goats mostly, and the great elk in the high mountains. Fira tilted her face up to the sun, closing her eyes. I had forgotten how good sunlight feels. They stood in comfortable silence for a while. Then Fira said quietly, I need to return home soon. My brother will be searching for me. If he comes here, he will kill me, Sebastian finished. I know. I will not let that happen. Fira opened her eyes and looked at him. You saved my life. I will not repay that by allowing you to be slaughtered. Can you travel? Your wound is healing well, but you are still weak. I will manage. She touched her side gingerly. Another few days, perhaps. I need to be strong enough to travel quickly. Something cold settled in Sebastian's chest at the thought of her leaving. He had grown accustomed to her presence, to their conversations and the easy companionship that had developed between them. The farmhouse would feel empty without her, but she had a life to return to, responsibilities and a family that was probably frantic with worry. He could not ask her to stay, no matter how much a small, selfish part of him wanted to. I understand, he said. I will help you prepare. Make sure you have supplies for the journey. Fira studied his face for a long moment. Will you miss me, Sebastian Whitmore? The question caught him off guard. He opened his mouth to give some casual, deflecting answer, then stopped. They had been honest with each other from the beginning. He would not start lying now. Yes, he said simply. I will miss you very much. Something complicated flickered across Fira's face. She looked away back toward the wheat field. I will miss you too. You are strange for a human, but I have grown to like you. Strange seems to be a theme in your assessment of me. Because it is true. Fira turned to face him fully. You are kind when my people are taught that all humans are cruel. You are gentle when we are told humans know only violence. You break every expectation I had, and that is unsettling. Unsettling in a bad way. No. Fira reached out and touched his face, her calloused fingers surprisingly gentle. Unsettling in a way that makes me question many things I thought I knew. Sebastian's breath caught. They stood very close, close enough that he could see the faint scarring on her green skin, the way her yellow eyes caught and reflected the sunlight. She was beautiful, he realized. Not in the conventional human way, but beautiful nonetheless. Strong and fierce and alive. He should step back. This was inappropriate, impossible. She was an orc and he was human, and their peoples had been killing each other for generations. Whatever he was feeling, it could lead nowhere good. But he did not step back. Neither did she. The moment stretched between them, charged with possibilities neither seemed ready to voice. Then Fira lowered her hand and turned away, breaking the spell. I am tired, she said, her voice carefully neutral. I should rest. Of course. Sebastian fell into step beside her, matching his pace to her slower one as they walked back to the farmhouse. Neither spoke, but he was intensely aware of her presence, of the scant inches that separated them. That evening, as he prepared dinner, Sebastian found his thoughts circling back to that moment in the field. The way Fira had looked at him, the gentleness of her touch, the way his heart had hammered when she stood so close. He was developing feelings for her. That realization should have terrified him, but instead it settled over him with a strange sense of inevitability. Of course, he cared for her. He had spent over a week caring for her when she was at her most vulnerable, had held her through fever dreams, and helped her take her first steps during recovery. How could he not develop feelings? But acting on those feelings would be madness. Even if she felt the same way, which was far from certain, what future could they possibly have? She was an orc scout with a life and family waiting for her in the mountains. He was a human farmer trying to build a peaceful life on the frontier. Their worlds did not overlap, and yet. 3 days later, Fira announced she was ready to travel. Her wound had healed to an angry pink scar, still tender but no longer a danger. She could walk without obvious pain, and had regained much of her strength through careful exercise and good food. Sebastian packed supplies for her journey: dried meat, hard bread, a waterskin, and medical supplies in case her wound reopened. He worked with methodical efficiency, trying not to think about the fact that she would be gone by nightfall. This is too much, Fira protested as he added a warm blanket to the pile. I cannot carry it all. You can if I help you to the tree line, Sebastian said. After that you will be close enough to your territory that you should be safe. You are not coming with me. Fira's voice went hard. Sebastian, if my people find you anywhere near our lands, they will kill you on sight. I told you this. I know. But I can at least get you safely to the border. No. She grabbed his arm, forcing him to look at her. I will not allow you to risk yourself for me. You have already done more than enough. They stared at each other, wills clashing. Finally, Sebastian sighed and nodded. All right, but take the supplies anyway, please. I will worry less knowing you have what you need. Fira's expression softened. You are impossible to argue with. So I have been told. They left the farmhouse at noon, moving slowly to accommodate Fira's still healing body. The forest that marked the beginning of orc territory lay about 3 miles north, a dark line of ancient trees visible even from Sebastian's fields. He had never ventured there, knowing the danger it represented. As they walked, Sebastian found himself memorizing details. The way Fira moved with predatory grace even when injured. How she constantly scanned their surroundings, her warrior training evident in every glance. The way sunlight turned her green skin almost luminous. He was going to miss her terribly. They stopped at the edge of his property, where his cultivated fields gave way to wild grassland. The forest loomed about a mile ahead, dark and forbidding. "I can make it from here," Fira said. She shifted the pack on her shoulders, adjusting the weight. "Thank you, Sebastian, for everything. Stay safe," he said, his throat tight. "And if you are ever hurt or in trouble again, you know where to find me." Fira smiled, a real smile that showed her small tusks. "I do." And perhaps if circumstances were different. She trailed off, shaking her head. "But they are not." "No," Sebastian agreed quietly. "They are not." For a moment they simply looked at each other. Then, moving simultaneously, they stepped together in an embrace. Sebastian wrapped his arms around her shoulders while hers encircled his waist. She was warm and solid and real, and he pressed his face against her hair, breathing in the scent of her. "Thank you," Fira whispered against his shoulder, "for seeing me as a person instead of a monster." "You are the least monstrous person I have ever met," Sebastian said. "Go home, Fira. Your family needs you." She pulled back, and he saw his own complicated emotions reflected in her eyes. Then she turned and walked away, heading north toward the forest. Sebastian watched until she disappeared into the grassland, her dark form growing smaller and smaller against the golden stalks. Then he turned and walked back to his farmhouse, feeling like he had lost something precious that he had never really had in the first place. The days after Fira left dragged by with leaden slowness. Sebastian threw himself into farm work, pushing his body to exhaustion so he would be too tired to think when he collapsed into bed each night. He harvested early vegetables from his garden, repaired fence posts that had been neglected during Fira's illness, and began preparing for the wheat harvest that loomed on the horizon. But the farmhouse felt unbearably empty. He caught himself setting out 2 bowls for dinner, then having to put one back. The chair beside his bed, where he had spent so many hours watching over Fira, sat unused and accusatory. He found one of the cloths he had used to cool her fever, and instead of washing it, he tucked it away in his trunk like a foolish keepsake. He was in love with her. That knowledge sat in his chest like a stone, undeniable and uncomfortable. He barely knew her, had only spent 2 weeks in her company, and yet she had carved out a space in his heart that now ached with absence. 2 weeks after Fira left, Sebastian was working in his wheat field when he heard something that made his blood run cold. Drums, deep and resonant, echoing from the forest to the north. Orc war drums. He dropped his scythe and ran for the farmhouse, his mind racing. They were coming. Fira's clan had likely found her by now, learned what happened, and decided that the human who had harbored her needed to be dealt with. Whether they believed his intentions were honorable or not, he would be seen as a threat. He burst into his farmhouse and grabbed the sword he kept hidden under his bed, the one he had brought home from the war and hoped never to use again. His hands shook as he buckled the belt around his waist. He was a decent fighter, trained by 5 years of brutal combat, but he could not stand against an orc war party alone. But he would not run. This was his land, his home. If they wanted to kill him, they would have to do it here. The drums grew louder, closer. Sebastian stepped outside and waited, one hand resting on his sword hilt. His heart pounded in time with the drums, and sweat ran down his back despite the cool afternoon air. Movement at the tree line. Shapes emerging from the forest, massive and green and heavily armed. Sebastian counted quickly, his military training taking over despite his fear. 20 warriors, maybe more, all in full battle gear, carrying weapons that glinted in the sunlight, At the front of the group walked a huge orc who could only be Fira's brother. He stood even taller than she did, his shoulders impossibly broad and his arms thick with muscle. A great axe hung from his back and numerous scars crisscrossed his exposed arms and chest. His face bore a strong resemblance to Fira's, but where her features held warmth, his were carved from stone. The war party stopped at the edge of Sebastian's wheat field. The massive orc, who had to be Korash, stepped forward alone. He stared at Sebastian for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he spoke, his voice like grinding rocks. "You are Sebastian Whitmore." It was not a question, but Sebastian answered anyway. "I am. My sister tells me you saved her life." Korash's hand moved to the axe on his back. "That you tended her wounds and sheltered her. Is this true?" "It is." Sebastian kept his hand away from his sword, trying to appear non-threatening. "I found her dying in my field. I could not leave her to suffer. You could have killed her, taken her head as a trophy. Many humans would have. I am not those humans." Korash studied him in silence. The other warriors shifted restlessly behind their chief, hands on weapons. The tension stretched like a bowstring drawn back too far, ready to snap. Then Fira pushed through the ranks of warriors, limping slightly but moving with determined purpose. She positioned herself between Sebastian and her brother, her chin raised defiantly. "Korash, no," she said firmly. "I forbid it." Her brother's eyes narrowed. "You forbid me. Sister, you have no authority here. I have a life debt to this man. By our laws, by our traditions, he is under my protection." Fira's voice rang out clear and strong. "You cannot harm him without going through me first." "He is human," Korash growled. "He could have violated you, tortured you, sold you to slavers. Instead, he claims he helped you. Why would he do this? What does he want?" "Nothing," Fira said. "He wants nothing from me. He helped because it was right, because he is honorable." She turned to look at Sebastian, and her expression softened. "Because he is a good man." Korash followed her gaze, his eyes sharp and assessing. Sebastian met that stare steadily, refusing to look away or show fear. If he was going to die today, he would do it with dignity. After what felt like an eternity, Korash spoke again. "You love him." It was not a question. Fira went very still, her back rigid. The other warriors muttered among themselves, shocked whispers in Orcish that Sebastian could not understand. "That is insane," one of the warriors called out. "Fira, he is human." "You cannot silence," Korash ordered, his eyes never leaving Fira's face. "Sister, answer me. Do you love this human?" Fira's hands clenched into fists at her sides. For a moment Sebastian thought she would deny it, would say something to placate her brother and her clan. Then she squared her shoulders and spoke clearly. "Yes, I love him." The world seemed to stop. Sebastian's breath caught in his chest, his heart stuttering. She loved him. Fira loved him. The implications crashed over him like a wave. She was confessing her feelings in front of her entire clan, knowing what it would cost her. Orcs who loved humans would be cast out. She had told him that. She was sacrificing everything. "Fira, no," he said hoarsely. "Do not do this. Do not throw away your family for me." She turned to look at him, her yellow eyes bright with unshed tears. "It is done, Sebastian. I cannot unfeel what I feel, and I will not lie about it, not to my brother, not to my clan." She faced Korash again. "Exile me if you must, but I will not allow you to harm him." The other warriors erupted in angry shouts, calling for Fira to reconsider, for Korash to exile her immediately. Some demanded Sebastian's death despite Fira's protection. The situation was spiraling out of control, violence hovering on the razor's edge. "Enough." Korash's voice boomed across the field, silencing the others. He stepped closer to Sebastian, his massive frame radiating menace. "You, human, what do you feel for my sister?" This was it. Sebastian could lie, could claim he thought of Fira as only a patient or a friend. It would probably save both their lives. But Fira had been brave enough to tell the truth. He could do no less. "I love her," he said clearly. "I have loved her since before I understood what I was feeling. She is the strongest, bravest, most remarkable person I have ever met. I love her, and I would spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of that love if she would let me." Fira made a small, choked sound. When Sebastian looked at her, tears were streaming down her face. Korash looked between them, his expression still unreadable. Then he did something unexpected. He started to laugh. It was not cruel laughter. It was the laughter of someone confronted with a situation so absurd, so impossible, that humor was the only possible response. The other warriors stared at their chief in confusion as his laughter echoed across the field. "The ancestors must be laughing at me," Korash said when he could speak again. "Of all the ways I imagined finding my sister, finding her in love with a human farmer was not among them." He shook his head. "You have created an impossible situation, Fira. I know." Her voice was small, uncertain. "Brother, I am sorry. I never meant to fall in love. I doubt anyone does." Korash looked at Sebastian again. "You understand what you are asking for. If Fira chooses you, she can never return to our clan. She will be cast out, forbidden from our lands. She will lose her family, her heritage, everything she has ever known." "I understand." Sebastian's throat felt tight. "And I would never ask that of her. I would never ask her to give up everything for me. But you want her to." "I want her to be happy," Sebastian said firmly. "If that means staying with me, then yes, I want that more than anything. But if it means returning to her people and forgetting about me, I will let her go. Her happiness matters more than mine." Korash studied him for a long moment. Then he turned to Fira. "And you? What do you want, sister?" Fira looked at Sebastian, then at her brother, then at the warriors assembled behind him. Her family, her people, the entire world she had ever known. Sebastian could see the war raging behind her eyes. "I want to stay with Sebastian," she whispered. "I want to build a life with him here." "But Korash, you are my brother, my only family. I cannot simply—" "You can." Korash's voice had gone soft. "You can choose your own path, Fira. You always could." He sighed heavily. "I am a clan chief. I have responsibilities, traditions to uphold. I should exile you right now for admitting what you feel. The council will demand it, I know. But I am also your brother. And I remember when you were small, how you used to follow me everywhere, how you cried when I left for my first hunt without you." Korash's expression cracked, showing the pain beneath. "I failed to protect you from the bear-wolf. I failed to protect our mother from the humans who killed her. I will not fail you now." He turned to address the assembled warriors. "My sister saved this human's life through her need for his help, and he saved hers in return. A life debt exists between them. By our laws, that debt is sacred and must be honored." His voice grew harder, brooking no argument. "More than that, she loves him and he loves her. I have seen enough death and hatred. I will not add more by separating them." "But the traditions," one of the warriors started. "Traditions can change," Korash said flatly. "Or have you forgotten that our ancestors once lived peacefully alongside humans? That we only began fighting when they pushed us from our lands?" He looked at each warrior in turn. "Perhaps it is time we remembered that humans are people too. Not all of them, perhaps, but this one has proven himself worthy." He turned back to Sebastian and Fira. "Here is my judgment. Fira, you may choose to stay with your human if you wish. You will not be exiled or forbidden from our lands, but you must understand that many of our people will not accept this. Life will be difficult for you both." "I do not care," Fira said immediately. "If I can stay with Sebastian without losing my family, I will face whatever challenges come." Korash nodded. And you, human, you will swear an oath to me now. Swear that you will protect my sister with your life. That you will honor her and care for her and never give me reason to regret this decision. Because if you hurt her, I will return with my warriors and nothing will stop me from separating your head from your shoulders. Do you understand? I understand. Sebastian drew his sword and dropped to one knee, holding the blade across his palms in the traditional gesture of fealty. I swear by everything I hold sacred that I will protect Fira with my life. I will honor her, cherish her, and spend every day trying to be worthy of her love. This I swear. Korash reached down and touched the sword blade, accepting the oath. Then it is done. Rise, Sebastian Whitmore. You are bound to my sister by more than debt now. Sebastian stood, his legs shaky with relief. Fira moved to his side immediately, and he wrapped his arm around her waist, holding her close. She leaned into him, her solid warmth a reassurance that this was real, that they had somehow found a way through the impossible situation. "Thank you," Fira said to her brother, her voice thick with emotion. "Korash, I save your words." But Korash's expression had softened. "Be happy, sister. That is all I have ever wanted for you." He looked at the warriors behind him. "We leave now. There is nothing more to be done here." As the war party began to file back toward the forest, Korash paused. "I will send word to the other clans about what has happened here. Some will understand. Others will not. Be prepared for trouble." "We will be," Sebastian said, "and thank you for giving us a chance." Korash nodded curtly, then followed his warriors. They disappeared into the trees, the sound of drums fading into silence. Sebastian and Fira were left alone in the wheat field, holding each other as the afternoon sun slanted golden across the land. "I cannot believe that just happened," Sebastian said shakily. "I thought I was dead. So did I." Fira pulled back to look at him, her hands coming up to frame his face. "But you stood there and told my brother you loved me. You are either incredibly brave or incredibly foolish. Probably both." Sebastian covered her hands with his own. "You told him first, and you were ready to be exiled for me. Why would you do that? Because you are worth it." Fira's thumbs stroked across his cheekbones. "Because in the 2 weeks I spent in your care, you showed me more kindness and compassion than I have known in years. Because when I look at you, I see the kind of man I want to spend my life with." She smiled through fresh tears. "Because I love you, Sebastian Whitmore." "I have tried not to, but I cannot help it." "Good," Sebastian said, his own eyes burning. "Because I love you too, and I have no idea what we are going to do about that, but I know I want to figure it out together." Fira laughed, the sound bright and free. Then she pulled him down and kissed him. Her lips were softer than he expected, warm and gentle against his own. Sebastian wrapped his arms around her and kissed her back, pouring everything he felt into that single point of connection. Relief and joy and love and wonder all tangled together, until he could not tell where one emotion ended and another began. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Fira rested her forehead against his. "So what happens now?" she asked. "Now," Sebastian smiled. "Now we go back to the farmhouse. I make dinner. We figure out how to make this work." He paused. "You are staying, right? You want to stay?" "Yes." No hesitation, no doubt. "If you will have me, I want to stay." "Then stay." Sebastian took her hand and laced their fingers together. "Stay and help me harvest the wheat. Stay and help me prepare for winter. Stay and build a life here with me. Stay for as long as you want." "What if I want to stay forever?" "Then I will spend forever trying to make you happy." They walked back to the farmhouse hand in hand, their path winding through the wheat field that had brought them together. The farmhouse looked different now, Sebastian thought. Not empty or lonely, but full of potential. A home waiting to be built. That evening, as they sat together eating dinner and planning their future, Sebastian thought about Marcus, the old farmer who had saved his life years ago. Every life saved was a small act of rebellion against the violence that had taken so much from all of us. He had not understood what that truly meant until now. By saving Fira, he had not just preserved one life. He had opened a door to something neither of their peoples had dared to imagine in generations: peace, understanding, love that transcended ancient hatreds. It would not be easy. Korash had been right about that. They would face prejudice and hostility from both sides. Some would never accept what they had built together, but others might see their example and wonder if perhaps there was another way forward. "What are you thinking about?" Fira asked, noticing his distant expression. "The future," Sebastian said. He reached across the table and took her hand. "Our future. It is going to be complicated. I know." Fira squeezed his fingers. "But I have faced werewolves and fever and the possibility of losing everything. I can face complicated. We will face it together." "Together," Fira agreed. The weeks that followed brought both challenges and joys. Fira proved to be a capable farmhand once her wound healed completely, her warrior's strength translating well to the physical demands of harvest work. They cut the wheat together, bundled it, and stored it in the barn. The work was hard but satisfying, made better by the companionship and the frequent stolen moments of affection. News of their relationship spread quickly through the surrounding human settlements. Some neighbors came out of curiosity, drawn by rumors of the farmer who had taken an orc as his woman. Most approached with suspicion and hostility, hands on weapons. But Sebastian met them all with calm friendliness, introducing Fira and inviting them to see for themselves that she meant no harm. Not all were convinced. Several neighbors stopped speaking to him entirely, and he heard whispers about contamination and betrayal when he went to Greystone Village for supplies. But others, particularly those who had seen enough of war to be tired of it, were cautiously accepting. Old Marcus's widow came to visit one day, bringing preserves as a gift and telling Sebastian that her husband would have been proud of him. He always said the only way to stop the killing was for someone to be brave enough to refuse to hate, she said, studying Fira with clear eyes. "Looks like you and your orc are doing just that." Fira also faced resistance from her people. Korash kept his word about not exiling her, but many clan members refused to acknowledge her choice. When she traveled to Orc lands to visit her brother, some warriors turned their backs on her in disgust. Children who had once adored their fierce scout now ran from her in fear. But others were curious. Young orcs especially seemed fascinated by the idea that a human could love an orc, that the hatred between their peoples was not as absolute as they had been taught. Fira found herself answering questions from nervous teenagers who slipped away from their parents to talk to her. "You are becoming a symbol," Sebastian told her one evening as they sat outside watching the sunset. "For your people and mine. People are watching us to see if this can work." "No pressure then," Fira said dryly, but she leaned her head on his shoulder, her hand finding his. "Do you ever regret this? Taking me in, falling in love with me, dealing with all the complications that came with it?" "Never." Sebastian kissed the top of her head. "Not even for a moment." "You are the best thing that has ever happened to me, Fira. I would face 100 angry mobs if it meant keeping you in my life. You may have to face a few more before this is over. Then I will." He tilted her chin up so he could look into her eyes. "We are in this together, remember. No matter what comes." As summer faded into autumn, they established a comfortable routine. Sebastian taught Fira more about farming, while she taught him to track game through the forest. They hunted together, bringing down deer and wild boar that supplemented their winter stores. In the evenings they would cook together, talk, and plan their future. The question of marriage hung between them, unspoken but present. Neither humans nor orcs would recognize a union between their kinds. There was no priest who would perform the ceremony, no elder who would give their blessing. But Sebastian knew what he wanted. On the first day of autumn, as red and gold leaves began to paint the forest in brilliant colors, he took Fira to the wheat field where he had found her. The stalks had been cut, leaving only stubble, but the field still held significance for them both. "This is where it started," he said, holding both her hands in his. "Where I found you dying and decided to help, where our lives became tangled together. I remember." Fira smiled softly. "I thought I was going to die in this field, then I woke up in your bed with you cooling my brow. I want to make you a promise." Sebastian took a deep breath, nervous despite himself. "I know we cannot marry in any traditional sense. No ceremony, no witnesses, no official recognition, but I want to pledge myself to you anyway, here in this place where we began." Fira's eyes widened. "Sebastian, I vow to you, Fira Crag, that I will love you for the rest of my life. I will stand beside you through whatever comes, good or ill. I will defend you, support you, and cherish you until my last breath." He squeezed her hands. "You are my family now, my home, my future. If you will have me." Tears streamed down Fira's green cheeks. "You foolish, wonderful man. Of course I will have you." She pulled one hand free to touch his face. "And I make the same vow to you. I will love you until the day I die. I will stand with you against all enemies. I will build a life with you and defend that life with everything I have." She pressed her forehead to his. "You are my heart, Sebastian Whitmore, my one, my only, my home." They kissed there in the harvested field, sealing their vows with no witness but the sky above and the land around them. It was not a traditional wedding, but it felt more binding than any ceremony could have been. They were choosing each other, deliberately and completely, in full knowledge of the costs and consequences. That night, they made love for the first time. A tender and passionate joining that felt like the natural culmination of everything they had built together. Sebastian traced the scars on Fira's green skin with reverent fingers, memorizing every line and mark that made her uniquely herself. She mapped his body in turn, her warrior's hands surprisingly gentle as she learned what made him gasp and shudder with pleasure. Afterward, wrapped in each other's arms, they talked deep into the night about their plans and dreams. They would stay on the farm, building it into something sustainable and prosperous. They would be an example to both their peoples that love could bridge even the deepest divides. They would face whatever challenges came together. "You think we could have children?" Fira asked quietly. "Is such a thing even possible between our kinds?" "I do not know," Sebastian admitted. "I have never heard of a human-orc pairing before, let alone one that produced children. But I suppose we can find out." He smiled. "Would you want that? Children, perhaps, someday?" Fira traced patterns on his chest with one finger. They would have a hard life, being neither human nor orc. Neither people would fully accept them. "No," Sebastian agreed, "but they would be loved." They would grow up knowing that their parents fought for the right to be together, that they refused to let hatred and tradition dictate their lives. That seems like a good foundation. "It does." Fira snuggled closer. "You are going to be a wonderful father. And you will be a fierce, protective mother who teaches our children to be strong and brave." They fell asleep tangled together, hearts beating in sync, dreaming of the future they would build. Winter came, blanketing the land in snow and forcing them to rely on their stored provisions. The farmhouse stayed warm thanks to the fireplace and the body heat they shared, curled together under thick blankets. They spent the long, dark evenings telling stories, playing simple games with carved wooden pieces, and planning improvements for the farm come spring. Korash visited once, arriving at the farmhouse on a bitterly cold day with snowflakes clinging to his fur cloak. Sebastian invited him in immediately, offering hot soup and a place by the fire. The orc chief accepted both, though he remained wary. "I wanted to see how you were surviving the winter," Korash said, watching his sister bustle around the kitchen with obvious familiarity. "Some of the clan wondered if you would starve or freeze without our support." "We are managing fine," Fira said firmly. Sebastian prepared well. "We have enough food stored to last until spring," Korash grunted, taking in the well-stocked shelves and the neat organization of the farmhouse. "You have made a good home here. Thank you." Sebastian set a bowl of soup in front of the chief. "Your sister helped with much of it." "She is a skilled hunter. We would not have as much meat without her." "Of course she is skilled. I trained her myself." But Korash looked pleased. He ate in silence for a moment, then said, "The council is still angry about my decision to allow this. Some call for your exile, Fira. They say you have betrayed our people. Let them say what they wish." Fira sat down beside Sebastian, close enough that their shoulders touched. "I have made my choice. I will not apologize for it. I am not asking you to." Korash met her eyes. "I am simply warning you that life will not become easier. The longer you stay with your human, the more entrenched the opposition will become." "Then they will be disappointed," Sebastian said quietly, "because we are not going anywhere." Korash studied him for a long moment. "You truly love her?" "More than anything." "Good." The chief stood, his bulk making the farmhouse feel suddenly cramped. "Because if you did not, I would kill you where you sit. Traditions be damned." He moved to the door, then paused. "Take care of my sister, human. She is precious to me." "I know," Sebastian said. "And I will. I swear it." After Korash left, Fira was quiet for the rest of the evening. Sebastian let her process her thoughts, understanding that seeing her brother had stirred up complicated emotions. Finally, as they were preparing for bed, she spoke. "You think we made a mistake?" she asked. "Choosing this life. We have made both our peoples angry. We live isolated, rejected by the worlds we came from. Perhaps it would have been better if you had simply let me die in your field." Sebastian crossed to her immediately, taking her face in his hands. "Listen to me. We made no mistake. What we have built together, this love, this life, it is real and good and worth fighting for." He kissed her forehead. "Yes, we face opposition. Yes, we have lost some connections to our pasts. But Fira, we have gained so much more. We have each other, we have a home. We have hope for a future that neither of our peoples thought was possible." "You truly believe that?" "I do," Sebastian smiled. "And I think deep down you believe it too. Otherwise you would not have chosen to stay." Fira leaned into him, her arms wrapping around his waist. "You are right. I do believe it. Sometimes I just need to hear you say it. Then I will say it as many times as you need." Spring arrived with the sound of melting snow and the return of birdsong. Sebastian and Fira worked together to prepare the fields for planting, turning the earth and enriching it with compost they had carefully maintained through the winter. It was hard, satisfying work that left them both exhausted and content at the end of each day. One warm afternoon in early spring, as they were taking a break from plowing, a group of riders approached from the south. Sebastian shaded his eyes, recognizing the uniforms of King's Army scouts. His stomach clenched with unease. The scouts dismounted at the edge of the property. Their leader, a weather-beaten man in his 40s with sergeant's stripes, approached carefully. His hand rested on his sword hilt, and his eyes locked onto Fira with obvious suspicion. "Sebastian Whitmore," the sergeant called out. "That is me." Sebastian stepped forward, positioning himself slightly in front of Fira. "What can I do for you, Sergeant? We have had reports of an orc living on this property, reports that you are harboring a potential enemy." The sergeant's eyes never left Fira. Is this true? Fira lives here, yes. But she is not an enemy. She is my partner, my chosen family. She means no harm to anyone. The sergeant's expression hardened. You fought in the border wars, Whitmore. You know what orcs are capable of, how they raid our villages and kill our people. And now you are bedding one. That is treason. That is love, Sebastian corrected firmly. And unless there is a law against it, which I know there is not, then I have done nothing wrong. There are laws against harboring potential spies and enemies of the realm. I am not a spy, Fira said, her voice calm but carrying an edge of steel. I am a scout, but I have made no reports to my clan about anything I have seen here. Sebastian and I simply want to live in peace. The sergeant looked like he wanted to argue, but before he could speak, one of the other scouts stepped forward. Sebastian recognized him with a start. It was Thomas, a man who had served in his unit during the war. Sergeant, permission to speak, Thomas said. The sergeant frowned. What is it, soldier? I know Sebastian Whitmore, sir. Served with him for 3 years. He is one of the best men I ever knew, saved my life twice. Thomas looked at Sebastian with something like respect. If he says this orc is not a threat, I believe him. Your belief is not what matters here, the sergeant snapped, but his certainty seemed to waver. We are here to investigate reports of unusual activity. And you have investigated, Sebastian said. You have seen that Fira and I are simply farming our land, not plotting any kind of attack or espionage. So unless you have an actual reason to arrest us, I would ask that you leave our property. The sergeant glared, clearly unhappy with the situation. But he was also a practical man who knew when he was on shaky legal ground. Fine. But I will be reporting this up the chain of command. Do not be surprised if someone else comes asking questions. We will be here, Fira said simply, living our lives and bothering no one. The scouts mounted up and rode away. Sebastian watched them until they disappeared over the horizon, his shoulders tight with tension. When he finally turned back to Fira, he found her watching him with soft eyes. You defended me, she said. Even knowing it could bring you trouble with your own people. Of course I did. Sebastian took her hand. I told you, we are in this together. More visitors came over the following months, some friendly and some hostile. But Sebastian and Fira met each one with the same quiet dignity and refusal to be ashamed of what they had built together. Slowly, grudgingly, their neighbors began to accept their presence. If the human and the orc wanted to live together on an isolated farm, well, that was their business. On the anniversary of the day Sebastian found Fira in his wheat field, they held a private celebration. Just the two of them. A good meal, an acknowledgement of how far they had come. As they sat outside watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors, Fira took Sebastian's hand. I have something to tell you, she said, her voice nervous in a way he rarely heard. What is wrong? Sebastian turned to face her fully, concerned by her tone. Nothing is wrong. Fira smiled, though her eyes were uncertain. At least I hope you will think so. Sebastian, I am pregnant. The world seemed to stop. Sebastian stared at her, his mind struggling to process the words. Pregnant. They were going to have a child. A real, living child who would be both human and orc, the first of their kind. Are you certain? He asked hoarsely. Yes. I have missed my monthly bleeding twice now, and I have been feeling ill in the mornings. I recognize the signs. Fira squeezed his hand. Say something. You are scaring me. Sebastian pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. I am happy, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Fira, I am so incredibly happy we are going to have a baby. She laughed, the sound bright with relief. Yes, we are. In about 6 months, I think. They held each other as the sun set, two people from different worlds who had found love in the most unlikely place. And now they would bring a new life into that love. A child who would embody everything they believed about breaking down barriers and building bridges. The pregnancy was not easy. Fira suffered from terrible morning sickness for the first few months, and Sebastian fretted constantly over her health. Neither of them had any idea what to expect from a human orc pregnancy. Would the child take after Fira's people or his? Would there be complications they could not anticipate? But as the months passed, and Fira's belly swelled with their growing child, those fears gradually gave way to excitement. They prepared a small room in the farmhouse as a nursery, building a crib from wood Sebastian cut and shaped himself. Fira sewed blankets and tiny clothes, her warrior hands proving surprisingly deft with needle and thread. Korash visited again when he heard about the pregnancy. He sat heavily at their table, his expression grave. "This child will face a hard life," he said bluntly. "Neither human nor orc. Rejected by both peoples." "We know," Sebastian said, "but the child will be loved. That has to count for something." "Love does not protect against prejudice and hatred." "No," Fira agreed, "but it gives you a reason to fight them." "Our child will grow up knowing that their parents refuse to let hatred dictate their lives. That is a powerful lesson," Korash sighed. "You are right, sister, but I still worry." "Then help us," Sebastian said. "Be present in this child's life. Teach them about their orc heritage, help them understand where half of them comes from. We cannot do this alone." The chief studied him for a long moment. Then slowly he nodded. "Very well. I will do what I can. This child is my blood after all, my niece or nephew." "Thank you, brother," Fira said softly. Word of the pregnancy spread quickly through both human and orc communities. Reactions were mixed. Some were horrified, calling the child an abomination. Others were curious, wondering what a human orc child would look like, how they would develop. A few brave souls expressed quiet support, saying it was time both peoples moved beyond the old hatreds. On a cold winter night, 6 months after Fira announced her pregnancy, their child came into the world. The labor was long and difficult. Sebastian stayed by Fira's side throughout, holding her hand and offering what comfort he could. He had faced battle without flinching, but watching Fira in pain, unable to do anything to help, was the hardest thing he had ever endured. Finally, as dawn broke across the frozen landscape, their daughter was born. She was small, smaller than a full orc baby but larger than a human one. Her skin was a pale green, lighter than Fira's but distinctly not human. She had small buds where tusks would eventually grow, and her ears were pointed like her mother's. But her eyes, when they opened, were the same dark brown as Sebastian's. "She is perfect," Sebastian breathed, tears streaming down his face as he cradled his daughter for the first time. "She is beautiful," Fira agreed, exhausted but radiant. "What should we name her?" They had discussed names at length during the pregnancy, wanting something that honored both their heritages. In the end, they chose a name that sounded beautiful in both common and orcish: Freya. Little Freya Whitmore came into a world that did not quite know what to make of her. But she had parents who loved her fiercely, an uncle who had sworn to protect her, and a small but growing circle of people who saw her not as an abomination, but as a symbol of hope. As Sebastian held his daughter and watched his wife sleep, exhausted from her ordeal, he thought again about Marcus, and his words about saving lives being acts of rebellion. By saving Fira, by loving her, by bringing their daughter into the world, they had done more than just rebel against old hatreds. They had started something new. The years that followed were not easy, but they were good. Freya grew into a bright, curious child who delighted in exploring the farm and the woods beyond. She had her mother's strength and courage, and her father's gentleness and patience. She learned to speak both common and orcish, to hunt like an orc and farm like a human. She was truly a bridge between two worlds. Other children followed, 2 sons and another daughter, each unique in how they balanced their mixed heritage. The farmhouse expanded to accommodate the growing family, rooms added and spaces reimagined. The wheat fields flourished under Sebastian's care and Fira's strength, providing enough income to support them all comfortably. The prejudice never fully disappeared. There were always those who looked at their family with suspicion or hostility. But slowly, painfully slowly, attitudes began to shift. Other human-orc couples formed, emboldened by Sebastian and Fira's example. Trade began to open between human settlements and orc clans, facilitated by those willing to see past ancient grudges. Korash became a frequent visitor, beloved by his nieces and nephews. He taught them to hunt and track, to honor their orc heritage and take pride in their strength. But he also, in his own gruff way, came to respect human culture and customs, acknowledging that both peoples had wisdom to offer. On their 10th anniversary, as Sebastian and Fira stood in the same wheat field where their journey had begun, they reflected on how far they had come. 4 children played nearby, their laughter ringing across the land. The farm had grown prosperous. Both human and orc neighbors now called on them for help and advice. "You ever regret it?" Sebastian asked, echoing Fira's question from so long ago. "The path we chose." Fira turned to him with a smile that made his heart skip a beat, even after all these years. "Never, not for a single moment." She took his hand, their fingers interlacing as naturally as breathing. "You are my heart, Sebastian Whitmore. You always will be. And you are mine." He pulled her close, kissing her as their children giggled and made exaggerated sounds of disgust. Forever. They had started with a simple act of kindness, one human refusing to let one orc die in his field. From that single choice, everything else had flowed. A love that should have been impossible. A family that bridged 2 worlds. A future that neither of their peoples had dared to imagine. As the sun set over their land, painting the wheat fields gold and red, Sebastian and Fira stood together, surrounded by their children and their hard-won happiness. They had fought for this life, this love, this family. They had faced prejudice and hostility from both their peoples. They had endured doubt and fear and countless challenges, but they had never left each other's side. From that first fevered night when Sebastian cooled Fira's brow and watched over her, refusing to let her slip away, they had been bound together. Through everything that followed, they had remained constant, partners, lovers, family. And as they looked out over the life they had built together, they knew with absolute certainty that every struggle, every sacrifice, every moment of doubt had been worth it, because they had each other. They had their children. They had proof that love could transcend even the deepest divides. They had found their happily ever after, not because it was easy, but because they had been willing to fight for it. Together. Always together. The wheat swayed in the evening breeze, golden and abundant, a promise of harvest to come. Their children chased each other through the stalks, their mixed heritage evident in their green-tinged skin and pointed ears, their human features and orc strength. They were the future, these children. Living proof that the old hatreds did not have to define tomorrow. Sebastian wrapped his arm around Fira's waist, and she leaned her head on his shoulder with comfortable familiarity. 10 years of marriage, 10 years of building a life together, and he still felt the same surge of love when he looked at her that he had felt that day in the wheat field when he first realized what she meant to him. "I love you," he said simply. "Now and always." "I love you too," Fira replied. "My heart, my home, my everything." And there, in the golden light of sunset, surrounded by the life they had created together, Sebastian and Fira knew they had found something truly precious. Not just love, though that was the foundation of everything, but proof that kindness could defeat hatred, that compassion could bridge divides, that two people from different worlds could build something beautiful together if they were brave enough to try. Their story had started with fever and fear, with a dying warrior and the human who refused to let her perish. It had grown into something neither could have imagined. A love story for the ages, a family that defied convention, and a living testament to the power of choosing compassion over cruelty. As darkness fell and stars began to emerge in the deepening sky, they gathered their children and returned to the farmhouse. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new obstacles to overcome. But tonight they were together, and that was enough. That would always be enough. The fire crackled in the hearth as they settled the children into bed, hearing their prayers and tucking blankets around small bodies. Sebastian and Fira moved through these nightly routines with practiced ease, a dance they had perfected over years of partnership. When the house finally quieted and their children slept, they returned to their own bed, holding each other in the darkness. "Thank you," Fira whispered, "for saving my life, for loving me, for giving me all of this." "Thank you for letting me," Sebastian replied. "For taking a chance on a strange human who found you in his field, for building this life with me." They fell asleep as they always did, wrapped around each other, hearts beating in perfect synchronicity. And in the morning they would wake to face whatever came next, together, always together. The end.